Desperate widow reveals amazing path to survival, unexpected job offer, transforms her life forever. Sarah stared at the pile of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter, her stomach knotting tighter with each glance. Erratic breathing accompanied the rush of despair. 2 weeks had passed since her husband's heart attack. Each day felt less like survival and more like trudging through quicksand. The weight of the world pressed down on her, a responsibility for her 2 young children. And yet, the echoes of their laughter seemed cruel amidst the financial chaos looming over them. In that moment, she felt him. Her husband's unwavering belief in her potential wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. He always saw her as capable of greatness. But now, the thought felt like a distant memory, a dream buried beneath layers of grief and obligation. She needed to stay strong. She needed to shield her children from the storm taking over their lives. The fantasies of her once thriving academic career, exploring the unknown in biology, seeking solutions, felt light years away. Who was she without him? Doubt settled in her veins like ice. As days blurred into each other, she found herself wandering to the local library, where memories of late-night study sessions and lively discussions with her professor floated through her mind. It was familiar and, unexpectedly, comforting. There, she bumped into Dr. Carter, her former professor who had ignited her passion for science. It felt surreal when he offered her a temporary research position in his lab. Her heart raced, excitement intersecting with paralyzing fear. Could she really step back into that world after years of raising a family? Walking into the lab for the first time, nostalgia washed over her like warm sunlight cutting through the cold of her reality. The clinks and clatters, the scent of chemicals in the air ignited something long lost. Yet as she approached her colleagues, their skeptical glances pierced through her like daggers. A single thought consumed her. Did they see her failure, or did they see the determination she carried deep down? A visceral turmoil churned within her. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. Days morphed into blurry weeks, and she dove into her work, driven and anxious. She submitted a proposal for groundbreaking research, her excitement bubbling over like a chemist's concoction. But just as quickly as hope rose, it came crashing down when her findings were dismissed, snatched up by a senior colleague claiming the credit as his own. Each dismissive look served as a reminder of the cracks in her self-worth. Anguish gnawed at her. Was she meant to cower, to let another person fake the integrity she so desperately cherished? Her mind teetered between fear and resolve, the memory of her husband's faith seeping into her determination. The ticking clock felt deafening, a reminder that time was running out, leaving her at a crossroads. Should she quietly obey the hierarchy above her or fight for what was right? The shadows of insecurities loomed large, and the inevitable question clawed at her. Would she stand tall for her integrity and show her children what it meant to be strong, or would she let fear dim her flame? With each passing day in the lab, Sarah's anxiety transformed into anger, simmering beneath the surface like a pot about to boil over. The dismissive laughter of her colleagues echoed in her mind as she meticulously reorganized the data from her earlier research. The room was filled with chatter, but it felt as if she were encased in glass, separated from a world she once felt part of. Moments of confidence flickered like dying embers. Each time she grasped the spark, it flickered and fell to darkness again. Misgivings gnawed at the edges of her thoughts. Was her work truly valid, or was it just a feeble attempt at reclaiming an identity she was unworthy of? Flashes of her children rushed through her mind, their innocent, trusting eyes, and she realized she couldn't let them witness her devolution into despair. What would they learn from me? She questioned herself. Would she become a cautionary tale, a portrait of stagnation, or could she morph into a symbol of resilience? That realization became her grounding force. She refused to let the shadows pull her down further. In the deep recesses of her heart, she conjured her husband's voice, reassuring her that she possessed the power to change her narrative. He wasn't just a voice from the past. He was a part of her, his belief woven into her core. The following day, she marched into the lab with renewed zeal. Determination electrified her demeanor as she confronted Dr. Carter about the theft of her findings. "Your work should shine, not be overshadowed by another's ambition," he said, his eyes sharpening. For the first time, hope flickered. He might stand with her. "I need to speak to the committee about my research," Sarah stated firmly, the quiver that had once resided in her voice replaced by metallic resolve. "I won't allow this to go unaddressed. I've poured myself into this work." Dr. Carter regarded her, surprise coating his features. "I can support you," he offered, a flicker of respect igniting in his blue eyes. "But it's up to you. You have to take the lead." Time blurred as Sarah collected her thoughts and organized her data. Paranoia whispered that she could lose everything, the security of her position, her colleagues' respect, but each doubt was met by a tidal wave of resolve. This was more than just about her work. It was about teaching her children to fight for their truth, to defy silence in the face of injustice. Nights in front of her computer turned into lessons in strategy, where she weighed her words carefully. The confrontation with the committee approached like a beast hiding in the shadows. The thought of standing before them illuminated her insecurities. Yet this time, the fear transformed into a tool she could wield. It could sharpen her focus, fuel her argument, and empower her voice. With the meeting scheduled, she spent countless hours rehearsing her points, envisioning every potential question. Every time her doubt flared, she thought of her children. What wisdom did she want to impart? Finally, the day arrived. As she stood in front of a group that felt both familiar and foreign, adrenaline coursing through her veins, she understood that this wasn't just about her. It was a testament to her journey, to her husband's unwavering faith, to all she wanted her children to learn about standing firm. The moment of truth approached, but just as she took a deep breath to begin, a figure emerged in the doorway, her senior colleague, a smirk plastered across his face. The time had come to confront not only systemic obstacles, but the very man who had belittled her work. As Sarah locked eyes with her senior colleague, the room transformed into a tightrope stretched between two towering cliffs, one side holding promise, the other a plunge into uncertainty. The smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth wove with memories of her fragile confidence. She had glimpsed strength within herself, but here he was, the embodiment of her self-doubt. "Looks like you're finally ready to swim with the sharks, Sarah," he quipped, making his way further into the room. The casual timbre of his voice, so sardonic, felt like a challenge. It threatened to elevate her past insecurities, igniting a fire she had buried deep beneath the ashes of ridicule. Taking a deep breath, she sought to expel negativity like a dark cloud. She had no time for this. She had come here to present her hard-won evidence, not to engage in a duel of egos. "I'm here to present my findings, Greg," she stated, her tone reflecting the steely resolve that simmered beneath the surface. She refused to give his mockery the power to distract her. "Well, it's about time you joined the rest of us in the real world," he countered, an eyebrow arching mockingly. But Sarah felt the weight of her husband's faith grounding her as she steeled herself against his verbal jabs. "This research matters," she declared more forcefully, feeling layers of her past peel back. "I've poured everything I have into this work, and I won't let your overconfidence overshadow that." The committee members shifted in their seats, caught in the crossfire of this confrontation. Sarah caught a glimmer of intrigue in some eyes, but she needed to capture their attention with more than a mere exchange of barbs. She glanced at Dr. Carter, his expression a tentative blend of encouragement and wariness. Gathering her thoughts, she launched into her presentation. Each point she made was a piece of herself laid bare for scrutiny, revealing the dedication she had invested even when others dismissed it. The graphs and data painted a vivid story. Every result spoke of her persistence. As she spoke, her voice gained momentum, infusing every fact with the fervor of her resolve. Yet, even as she painted a convincing picture, Greg's presence lingered, a thorn that refused to be dislodged. His palpable disdain ruffled the atmosphere. It was an incessant reminder of the self-doubt that had plagued her. Halfway through, her composure began to wane. The urge to look away, to mask the cracks with professional decorum, surged within her. Then, recalling her children's faith that burned within her like a beacon, she pressed on. This is more than a numbers game. It's about setting a new direction for our community's research initiatives and ensuring no one feels devalued. Her voice resonated as the walls of uncertainty started to crumble. As she concluded her presentation, the room fell into a heavy silence. She had no illusions about triumph. The looming shadows still hovered. Even so, she stood taller than when she had first entered. Desperate for assurance, she met the committee's collective gaze. The moment stretched impossibly long, with each heartbeat echoing her hope mixed with apprehension. Would they recognize her effort, her personal journey woven into this project? Would the tide finally turn in her favor? Greg finally broke the silence, though his tone had shifted. So you think you have what it takes to lead? This could backfire, Sarah. The subtle challenge in his words ignited a new flame within her. I don't just think, I know, she replied, confidence surging to her core, and if I falter, I promise to stand up again. Just then, the committee chair, an older woman with an air of authority, cleared her throat. Let's take a moment to evaluate the merits of Sarah's work. Sarah felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with apprehension as she waited for their judgment, an undeniable reality dawning upon her. She realized that no matter the outcome, the confrontation had marked a shift. She was no longer merely a voice in the background. This was her fight, and she was prepared to see it through. But as conversations erupted around her, a fleeting thought crept forward, a question that lingered. What would her future hold now that she dared to confront the very obstacles that had once crippled her? The stakes felt higher than ever, and Sarah knew that she stood at the precipice of a turning point. Would this catalyst spark an open door or close a chapter she had only begun to write? The hushed murmur of conversation swirled around Sarah as she grappled with the significance of her moment. As she leaned against the edge of the presentation table, the weight of uncertainty coiled tightly within her. What would those esteemed professionals behind the tables conclude from her work? She felt the burning gaze of Greg, still lingering as if he had a vested interest in her failure. The committee deliberated, their low tones punctuating the tension that hung like a storm cloud in the room. Having carved out a niche for herself in a relentless environment, she refused to let that storm deter her, nor quench the resolve that had been ignited within. She was no longer the timid researcher. She embodied a mosaic of every rejection, every dismissal, and every faint glimmer of hope she had ever clung to. Sarah, can you clarify your methodology? Dr. Carter finally called out, breaking through the static of doubt. She met his gaze and found an ally, a flicker of curiosity rather than a challenge in his eyes. As she began to elucidate the intricacies of her research design, she sensed uncertainty begin to evaporate. Her confidence surged once more, each word woven with a newfound clarity. She had anticipated an uphill battle, yet here it was, becoming an opportunity to unfold her narrative, to share her passion, a passion that could inspire change. Good, Dr. Carter affirmed, nodding appreciatively. And about your conclusions regarding community engagement? It's intriguing, but how do you plan to implement those findings? For a heartbeat, a flash of fear gripped her. They were no longer scrutinizing just her work, they were assessing her vision. She envisioned the faces of residents she had studied, their dreams and their struggles, threading them into her answer. It's not just about numbers, it's about putting strategies into action, listening, absorbing feedback, and iterating to fit those needs with real solutions, she stated, her voice firm. Greg sneered slightly, but even he couldn't mask the intrigue developing within the group. Beneath that facade of accumulated venom, she saw a flicker of something else, recognition. She was certainly swimming with the sharks, but she refused to drown. Yet as she opened this conversation further, she felt a nagging thought peek its head again. As much as the committee's responses pushed Sarah's confidence forward, the nagging voice of self-doubt still whispered in the recesses of her mind. What if they dismissed her efforts again? What if Greg's derision eventually wasn't just an annoyance but a resonant truth? As the discussion continued, she wrestled with her vulnerability and the realization that visible success often carried the weight of a trade-off, the balance between intense ambition and the fear of inadequacy. The truth stung painfully. Even amid triumphs, she remained hungry for validation. At length, the chairwoman raised her hand, her expression unreadable. "Let's conclude here, and I think we have enough to deliberate on. You've made—" Before she finished, Sarah interrupted with a burst of impulsive courage. "If I become the person to lead this initiative, I will ensure its integrity lands deeper than these walls. I promise I won't just ask questions. I will hold myself accountable for providing answers." The room fell silent, the weight of her declaration casting a new aura around her. She had crossed a threshold, a line drawn not just in the sand, but in the fabric of her existence. Taking ownership felt invigorating yet terrifying. As they began to gather their notes, Greg leaned forward, his condescending smirk replaced by a critical observation. "You think you're ready for leadership? It isn't as simple as giving promises." "Perhaps," Sarah countered, defiance carded in her voice, "but perhaps you underestimate the power of determination fueled by experience." With a wary glance toward the chairwoman, anticipation began to replace apprehension. Her thoughts spiraled and organized themselves, ignited by the recent exchange. Was she on the brink of something life-changing? Was leadership truly within her grasp now that she had shaken the tether of self-imposed limitations? The committee left the room, yet as Sarah stood alone, she felt a tremor in her purpose. The question lingered like a challenge in the air. Was she prepared for whatever awaited on the other side of this pivotal moment? Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a distraction in the wake of the aftermath. Unfurling the notification, her heart raced. An unexpected email from an external organization beckoned her attention. It promised an opportunity that could reshape her career, but would it also disrupt her newfound determination? In an instant, Sarah's pulse quickened in delight and dread. Would she embrace this unexpected chance, or relinquish control amidst the chaos that had just begun to settle? The glow from her phone's screen was a beacon, pulling her attention toward the opportunities nestled within the bytes of text. Sarah's heart thudded heavily in her chest as she read the subject line again. An invitation to speak at a national conference, one where she'd have the chance to share her research with a broader audience. The mere thought of it sent thrill and tremor through her, igniting questions that ricocheted in her mind. Was this the break she had longed for? What if she failed to impress at such a pivotal moment? She could almost visualize the stage, the spotlight illuminating her face as she spoke. But what if it wasn't mere fantasy? What if it was a glimpse of her potential, one that lingered tantalizingly out of reach? The connection between the invitation and her recent presentation sent a shiver of introspection coursing through her. This was a chance to validate her work on a national scale, to pivot her career in a way she had only dared to dream. Yet with excitement came the familiar tendrils of anxiety. The committee had seen her as a leader, but could she truly step into such a spotlight? The remnants of self-doubt crept in, urging her to consider the risks. What if she faltered under pressure? What if Greg's scoffing illusion became her reality, the empty promise she dared to utter, unraveling before her eyes? In this moment of uncertainty, Sarah took a breath, focusing on the weight of her past experiences. Each rejection she had faced, every cold shoulder she had encountered, had shaped her into someone who could redefine her narrative. No longer just a participant, she had a voice. The glimmers of hope now began to outshine the shadows of fear. She recalled the affirmations from Dr. Carter, the intrigue woven into their conversation, tying her determination to something greater than herself. She could not allow the ghosts of doubt to shackle her ambitions. Turning her gaze toward the window, she watched the rippling sunlight dance on the pavement below, evoking clarity among the chaos. Sarah felt something shift, a fortitude born from the tumult of doubt and conviction. This was not merely a chance to share her findings. It was an invitation to lead, to connect her research to real-world impact. Rising from her chair, Sarah clicked the email open, her resolve mingling with cautious excitement. She parsed through the details, her mind racing as she formulated potential topics for discussion. Leadership, community engagement, and strategic implementation floated into focus, her voice carving a path through the murky waters of uncertainty. Each element sparked fresh ideas, ignited by the prospect of rising above mistrust's whisper. But as she hovered over the reply button, an unexpected call spilled into the quiet of her thoughts. What lay beyond acceptance? Could this be the pivotal moment she had sought? or would it descend into another cycle of her self-doubt? It wasn't a matter of whether she could speak publicly. It was about what she would stand for when she did. With a fierce clarity that felt electrifying, Sarah realized that this wasn't just about her. This was about every person her work might touch, about pushing against the limits imposed by her own anxieties and the prejudices of others like Greg. The decision had to come from a deeper place within her. She swallowed hard, heart racing as she found her voice. "I can do this," she whispered to the empty room, reinforcing the mantra she would adopt. Grasping her phone tightly, she positioned her fingers over the keyboard again, exhilaration sparking her power. As she began typing a response, however, another notification blinked on her screen, a follow-up message she had not anticipated. This one raised the stakes even higher, hinting at more than just an opportunity for one voice. It spoke of collaboration, mentorship, and even funding for the very initiative she had described. The pull of this emerging path tugged intensely at her resolve. Would she seize the mantle she knew she yearned for, or would she hesitate once more in the face of uncertainty? Sarah's fingers hovered over the keys as she considered her next move. The moment felt heavy with expectation. She could feel herself at a precipice. What awaited her on the other side? The air thickened with possibility, and for the first time, she wondered if she was ready to embrace all that lay in wait. What if, after all this time, she hadn't just found an opportunity, but a catalyst for personal transformation? The choice loomed before her, urgent and undisguised, altering the very fabric of her path. What would she choose, and would it change the trajectory of her life forever? The weight of Sarah's indecision bore down on her chest, a tangible anxiety that buzzed like static electricity. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering in rhythm with a growing realization. This was no ordinary invitation. It represented the culmination of countless hours spent in the shadows, crafting her research while others dismissed her contributions. It represented a fight against the narrative that had defined her for too long. With a sharp breath, clarity wrestled control from her doubts. She quickly used her fingers to tap out a response, her thoughts weaving together into a coherent tapestry of intention. The moment she hit send, a flood of exhilaration rushed through her body. It wasn't simply about accepting an invitation. It was about vowing to herself that she was deserving of this moment. In the days that followed, the rush of commitment transformed into a series of rigorous preparations. Sarah immersed herself in her research, refining her findings, ensuring each data point was robust enough to sustain scrutiny. She practiced her delivery, standing before her mirror, transforming her living room into a makeshift stage. At times, her reflection mirrored her excitement. At others, it captured the shadow of anxiety lurking just beneath the surface. The culmination of her preparatory efforts led her to reach out to a network of peers and mentors. Sarah initiated discussions with Dr. Carter, whose encouragement had fed her aspirations. With each conversation, she mapped out the potential frameworks of her presentation, pushed the boundaries of her self-imposed limitations, and steadily dismantled the self-doubt that had previously paralyzed her. Then came the inevitable confrontation, the moment where she had to face Greg. Their paths crossed at a routine meeting scheduled at the university. The air felt thick with tension as they exchanged pleasantries, but Sarah sensed his skepticism reflected behind his polite smile. As he launched into a casual critique of their department's initiatives, she felt the familiar sting of underestimation wash over her. When the conversation shifted to her upcoming presentation, Greg leaned back, a wry smile creeping across his face. "Are you sure you want to put yourself out there, Sarah? Conferences can be brutal. Maybe you should start with smaller venues," he suggested, his tone laced with condescension. In that instant, something within her shifted. The years of dismissals and undercurrents of doubt crystallized into a singular focus. She would no longer be molded by the perceptions of others. Her voice rang out with unexpected confidence as she replied, "Actually, I think it's the perfect platform to share my insights. It's about time I stepped out of the shadows." The moment hung suspended between them, his expression morphing from disbelief to mild surprise. As she returned to her seat, a rush of empowerment coursed through her veins. Sarah had confronted the very source of her anxiety, facing off against the remnants of her past that had held her hostage for too long. It felt exhilarating, liberating. A small yet significant victory on her path toward transformation. Days turned into sleepless nights of meticulous planning, her heart fueling the urgency in her preparations. Yet, beneath the bravado, she still wrestled with self-doubt, a mantra of what-ifs shadowing her every thought. What if her voice trembled? What if her research was met with indifference? She had to confront this inner critic head-on. Then a final email arrived, offering insights from a mentor she had deeply respected. It came as a revelation, not merely affirming her intellect, but illuminating an underlying talent she hadn't fully acknowledged, her ability to connect with her audience on a personal level. Reflecting on this insight, she began weaving deeper emotional narratives into her presentation, recognizing the profound impact of storytelling alongside empirical data. As the days edged closer to the conference, Sarah's determination sharpened into a laser-like focus. She had begun to visualize the audience not just as a backdrop of skeptics, but as a collective on the verge of potential change, a chance to reshape perspectives and ignite discussions. The stakes felt higher than ever, yet she understood that her journey had already shifted her trajectory. She embraced the chaos of her emotions, the growing anticipation, the remnants of doubt, and the undeniable urge to inspire change. As she finalized her slides late one evening, her phone buzzed with an unexpected text from Dr. Carter, sharing her excitement about the upcoming event and inviting her to join a roundtable discussion on transformative ideas in their field. With each opportunity, the path grew clearer, but also more daunting. Standing at the intersection of fear and hope, Sarah realized that her transformation hinged not just on the presentation itself, but on the conversation it would spark. Would this be the moment she turned the corner, or would it risk throwing her back into despair? With one final glance at her presentation slides, she felt the air thicken once more. She was one step closer to the brink of her potential. What awaited her on the other side? The morning of the presentation arrived with an air of tension that wrapped around Sarah, clinging to her skin like a second layer. In the hours before, she had barely managed to consume a crumb of breakfast, each bite feeling heavy in her stomach. The echoes of self-doubt had risen to a cacophony, demanding her attention. It was then, in the quiet moments between slips of confidence and frantic thoughts, that Sarah confronted the truth. She could either step forward into the unknown or allow the familiar shackles of fear to bind her once again. Time blurred as she prepared her final notes one last time. Each bullet point made her worries tangible, but also reminded her of the rigorous journey she had undertaken to create this presentation. There was urgency in her actions. She could feel the momentum building as her heartbeat quickened, an almost primal call to take the stage. As she entered the venue, the atmosphere buzzed with hushed conversations, the flicker of anticipation rolling off the crowd like static. This was where she would redefine herself, turning her vulnerability into strength. Shrugging off both Greg's condescension and the ghosts of the past, she sought solace in the faces around her. Instead of viewing them as detractors waiting for her missteps, she challenged herself to perceive them as potential allies eager for new insights. Dr. Carter's encouraging words echoed in her mind, a reminder of the power of connection, a beacon guiding her through the haze of anxiety. Sarah visualized stepping beyond ridicule, beyond judgment. She moved through the rows of seats and found a moment of stillness before her time. Her hands trembled, but they were no longer signs of fear. They were an embodiment of her newfound resolve. She stood at the podium, the spotlight illuminated not just her frame, but her vision. An introductory note slipped from her lips, and for an instant, her world shrank to the rhythm of her heartbeat synchronized with the audience's silent anticipation. Her voice steadied, and she launched into the narrative that had driven her labor. With each word, the carefully constructed layers of emotion and data emerged, tightly woven into a compelling whole. Moments passed, and she fell into her flow. She noticed heads nodding and eyes lighting up as she shared her insights. A spark ignited. This wasn't merely an exchange of ideas, it was a shared journey. As she transitioned into the intricate details of her research, the once daunting audience transformed in her perception, becoming allies in this exploration of knowledge. Their engagement was palpable, their curiosity met with her passion. Yet even amidst this surge of empowerment, a thought flickered, haunting her from the corner of her mind. What if there were critical questions she hadn't anticipated? What if her narrative unraveled under scrutiny? That uncertainty lingered, but she chose to harness it, stoking the fire of her rhetoric. With renewed focus, she shifted gears toward the discussion, ready to respond and engage. Just as she completed her final slide, a hand shot up from the back of the room. It belonged to an esteemed colleague she greatly admired, but had always considered unreachable. "Your findings are impressive," he stated, "but I'm curious about your methodology. How might it adapt to different contexts?" The query was loaded, and in that instant, she felt the stakes rise. This was not merely a question, but a challenge to the depth of her expertise. She took a breath, recalling Dr. Carter's advice about authenticity and vulnerability. The fear crawled back, but instead of succumbing, she leaned into it, transforming it into an opportunity to showcase her adaptability. "I appreciate that question," she replied, feeling her heart race as she opened up the discussion. "What you've raised speaks to the very essence of this research, that we must contextualize our findings." As she navigated through the ensuing dialogue, Sarah became aware of a shift within herself. She wasn't just discussing research, she was asserting her presence, carving out a space where her ideas held weight, where she belonged. The room filled with thought-provoking exchanges, laughter puncturing the tension, a collective motion bridging gaps between established norms and innovative ideas. It reaffirmed her belief in the power of vulnerability and open dialogue as tools of change. When the session drew to a close, the applause echoed in her ears like a beautiful affirmation of her journey. Yet, amongst the swell of exhilaration was the weight of uncertainty, a realization that there would be new challenges to navigate, more prejudices to confront, and numerous future interactions with Greg looming on the horizon. As she exited the stage, exhilaration coursed through her veins, invigorating her sense of purpose. She had ignited a conversation, stepped squarely into her power, yet a thought lingered. Would she be able to sustain this momentum when faced with the inevitable challenges ahead? With fading applause behind her, Sarah felt an unmistakable shift in the air. This was just the beginning, a pivotal moment unfolding into a series of choices that could redefine her professional path. She gathered her belongings, steeling herself for the next inevitable challenge. What awaited her in the aftermath of this breakthrough was the real test of her newfound identity. As Sarah stepped away from the podium, the applause trailing off behind her, she was engulfed in a whirlwind of emotions. It was exhilarating, yes, but beneath that thrill lurked a sense of dread. The air in the room, filled with animated discussions and shared thoughts, felt charged with potential, yet she recognized the fragility of this newfound confidence. Her mind raced as she wove through the scattered clusters of colleagues still buzzing with excitement. A few offered congratulations, voices blending into a comforting hum, but Sarah's attention slipped between fleeting smiles and the knots of anxiety tightening around her stomach. Could she continue to be this person? The thought of reverting to her old self, timid and hesitant, sent shudders of resolve through her. Greg's voice haunted her as she recalled his dismissive remarks from earlier in her career. Would he still see her as the underdog, or had this presentation reshaped their dynamic? The notion of confronting him again sent a chill down her spine, but she refused to let it stifle her determination. She had weathered the storm and emerged, if not unscathed, at least resilient and aware of her worth. Later that afternoon, she found herself in a cafe, its corner table offering a brief reprieve. The atmosphere was comforting, yet the shadow of her insecurity returned, weighty and familiar. She reminded herself of the power of authenticity she had invoked on stage, the connection forged through genuine dialogue with peers. Refocusing, she took out her laptop. Responding to emails and sharing her presentation materials felt like a step in stabilizing her presence in this new world. Each reply felt like a brick laid in her foundation, a fortification against the insecurities whispering doubts into her ear. An email from Dr. Carter landed in her inbox, a temporary diversion. It was short but impactful, praising her eloquence and the depth of her analysis. "Your work isn't just good, it's vital. I believe you should submit this to the upcoming journal issue." A swell of pride washed over her, and she could almost hear the echo of applause in the back of her mind again. But as swiftly as the joy surged, doubt clawed its way back in. This was real commitment. Submission meant vulnerability, opening herself to greater scrutiny, possibly more rejection. Putting her laptop aside, Sarah's eyes drifted aimlessly around the cafe. She was startled from her thoughts by the sound of laughter from 2 tables away. One of the voices was Greg's. Curious, she half turned to catch a glimpse. To her surprise, he wasn't alone. He was engaged in an animated discussion with someone she recognized from a different department. The sight of him animated, a stark contrast to the coldness she often associated with his interactions, stirred something in her. It was evident he had allies, perhaps even a network she had yet to cultivate. Would facing him again prompt the same condescending remarks, or would this new dynamic offer potential for collaboration? A sudden resolve flooded through her. Confronting Greg was no longer merely a task. It would be an opportunity for negotiation, for redefining that fraught relationship into something productive. She had stepped out from beneath his shadow for the first time and into her spotlight. Yet, as she navigated her way through this burgeoning confidence, deep inside lay a gnawing fear. Could she maintain this momentum? The next days would undoubtedly test her resolve, and she suddenly wondered how different her reality would be after those encounters. Sarah swirled the remaining coffee in her mug, confronting the reflection of her thoughts in the dark liquid. Her clarity was morphing into anticipation. But was it excitement or trepidation she felt? What lay ahead? New connections, potential triumphs, or the haunted specter of past failures? The questions began to envelop her, and her determination wavered for just a moment before she steeled herself. She resigned herself to the fact that the journey was just beginning. With a mixture of dread and excitement churning within, Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to navigate the complex web of her professional world. Little did she know, minutes later, an unexpected message would change the direction of her life once more. The path she thought unfolded might soon twist into something she had never imagined. With each tick of the clock, Sarah's heartbeat quickened as thoughts of the email from Dr. Carter lingered in her mind. The prospect of submitting her work for publication resonated within her, yet with it came a gnawing discomfort. The stakes had never felt higher. Each past rejection echoed threateningly, warning her that vulnerability could lead to ridicule instead of recognition. She watched the barista clean up after the lunch rush, her mechanical movements mimicking Sarah's own mental processes. Just like the cafe bustling with activity, her mind was frenetic, spurring her toward decisive action. The choice between embracing opportunity and retreating into safety loomed over her, a decision that would shape her trajectory in both personal and professional spheres. Deciding that avoidance would only fuel her insecurities, Sarah picked up her laptop again. In a moment of brave clarity, she opened a new document titled Submission Draft. The blank page stared back, taunting her to write. Anxiety pooled in her stomach, but she pushed through, typing words that echoed with authentic passion. As she wrote, Sarah recalled moments of self-doubt, those early days when she had hidden behind her colleagues in meetings, voice muted and thoughts tucked away. With each keystroke, she felt her confidence swell, layering her work with the conviction she had just shared on stage. The act of weaving her ideas into sentences felt revitalizing, transforming abstract apprehensions into tangible resolve. With a sense of urgency overtaking her, she glanced at her watch. She had a meeting with Greg scheduled for the following day, an opportunity she almost feared was premature. What if her newfound resolve crumbled in the face of his sharp commentary? Clenching her jaw, she decided that instead of shying away, she would prepare, researching his recent projects, exploring their mutual connections. Making a list of her accomplishments felt empowering. This was not just about defending her ideas. It was about asserting her space in a domain that often felt dominated by others. Sarah envisioned each inked bullet point as armor, equipping her for intellectual sparring. What had once been a shaky foundation now took form as a solid ground built on evidence of her capabilities. The cafe's ambiance started to shift around her. Patrons filtered in and out, laughter mingling with focused discussions. Yet Sarah felt ensconced in a bubble of quiet resolve. With every passing minute, she resisted the urge to abandon her draft in favor of an easier path, reviewing her old projects for comfort or drowning in distractions. Upon leaving the cafe, the city buzzed with energy, but Sarah steeled herself for what lay ahead. Her phone buzzed, an alert signaling a message. It was from Dr. Carter, suggesting a meetup to discuss the submission process at greater length. Excitement raced through her, closely tied to fear of the unknown. This meeting could uncover the pathway to future collaborations, or it could expose her vulnerabilities in the harsh light of scrutiny. Nerves fluttered in her stomach, but she breathed deeply, recognizing the importance of each step in her development. The path leading to that meeting would not only refine her professional persona, it would deepen her sense of self-worth. For the first time, she felt the thrill of possibility rather than the dread of expectation. As she moved through the bustling streets, an unexpected realization struck her. This was not just a test of endurance, it was an opportunity for growth. The fear didn't define her, it propelled her. The confrontation she dreaded didn't hinder her, it provided a chance to evolve. Yet just as she felt an inkling of peace, a notification pierced her thoughts. The task ahead was even more daunting than she imagined. A colleague had commented on her recent presentation, and the message hinted at something more, possibly a stark critique she had overlooked. Curiosity mingled with the stabs of anxiety, urging her to check it immediately, as if uncovering a hidden truth that could change everything. What awaited her would either solidify her confidence or unravel it further. She wondered, was it supportive feedback or a sinister commentary lurking in the shadows? The weight of uncertainty loomed greater than ever. The weight of anticipation pushed hard against Sarah's chest as she stood in front of her computer late that evening. The email notification was still blinking, an incessant reminder of both possibility and fear. She took a deep breath, fortified by the understanding that she had come too far to let dread dictate her actions. This was her arena now. She had fought hard to embrace this transformative chapter of her life. With trembling fingers, she opened the email from her colleague. The words that met her eyes were the opposite of what she expected. A commendation of her presentation, followed by constructive feedback that encouraged further exploration of her research goals. The validation surged through her, cleansing away remnants of the doubt that had plagued her for years. This was a signal. Her growth was acknowledged. She felt a shift within, like stones gradually rolling away from her heart, revealing an illuminated path forward. That spark ignited a determination deeper than any she had experienced before. No longer was she merely content with survival. She was ready to flourish. Mapping out a timeline for the submission of her research became her next venture. Each deadline represented a commitment to herself and her children, to show them that courage and ambition can thrive in the aftermath of loss. The next morning greeted her with a renewed sense of purpose. Sarah arrived at the lab, energy coursing through her veins. She prepared for her meeting with Greg, channeling the echoes of doubt she had silenced into a fierce resolve. This interaction would not be about defensiveness, it would center on collaboration. She envisioned herself standing taller, embracing the power of her newfound identity. As she entered the conference room, anticipation crackled in the air. Greg looked surprised at her arrival, but his face was non-committal, harboring traces of skepticism, a reaction she had become accustomed to. "Ready to discuss our upcoming project?" he asked, masking condescension with a veneer of professionalism. "Absolutely," she replied, her voice steady, refusing to show vulnerability. They exchanged ideas and developed strategies for the project. Each point she made was met with counterarguments, yet instead of retreating, she engaged with purpose. No longer was she the timid researcher, she was a collaborator seeking answers, driving the discussion toward innovative solutions. The dialogue unraveled as a dance of intellect. Greg's demeanor began to shift, albeit slightly, as he recognized her command of the topic. It felt like a small victory, but it held immense significance. For the first time, they were peers, not mentor and mentee, no longer divided by the constraints of hierarchy. After an invigorating exchange, Sarah felt a surge of confidence. Their meeting illuminated something unanticipated within her, the capacity to navigate disagreement, to assert her voice constructively. She departed the conference room fortified, ready for the next stages of her journey. In the following weeks leading up to the journal submission, Sarah harnessed each moment to cultivate her research further. With Dr. Carter's mentorship, she amassed insights and revisions, sculpting her study into a robust piece of scholarship that would truly reflect her journey. As she immersed herself in her work, clarity crystallized around her vision. This was not only about academic recognition, but also about paving the way for future conversations in her field. The submission day arrived, punctuated by an air of liberation. She hit send on the email that carried her research into the world, feeling a weight lifted, replaced by a tide of pride. She recognized that she was no longer the hesitant widow flickering in shadows. She was a woman who had conquered her fears. Months later, the approval email from the journal arrived. As she read the words, her heart raced with joy and disbelief. Sarah's research had been accepted for publication. It was an achievement marked not just by academic recognition, but by the realization that her transformation was complete. Within the space of a year, she had redefined her career trajectory, emerging not just as a researcher, but as a respected voice in her field. Reflecting on her journey, she understood that grief had catalyzed her growth. The death of her husband had thrust her into chaos, but it had also forged her resolve. She now recognized her strength. She had shown her children what resilience looked like. Sarah closed her laptop and looked out of her window, soaking in the vibrant world outside. She felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, not just as an academic, but as a person wholly transformed. This was her moment. Now it was time to embrace it fully and invite others to share in her journey. It's time for you to embrace your own transformation. If you loved Sarah's story and want more exclusive emotional journeys like hers, you need to subscribe immediately. Leave a like now to show your support. It truly fuels our passion. Comment your thoughts and reactions, share how stories of personal overcoming resonate with you, and don't wait even one more second to share this with at least 5 friends who need inspiration in their lives. Let's spread the message of resilience together.